It was past midnight, and the city outside his window hummed with the distant wail of sirens, a lullaby he'd long ago tuned out. Alex wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his flour-dusted forearm, his hands trembling slightly as he seasoned the thick slab of meat that had arrived in his delivery crate earlier that evening. The label had read, "Prime Cut," unspecified, a bulk order from that shady wholesaler downtown who never asked questions and always undercharged. Money was tight since the restaurant laid him off. Another victim of the endless chain of pop-up failures. And this was his last shot at a decent meal before his credit card maxed out. He didn't question the unusual marbling, the way the flesh yielded under his knife like it was almost reluctant. Just another tough night, he told himself, firing up the cast-iron skillet with a hiss of oil. The sizzle filled the air as the meat hit the pan, juices bubbling up in dark rivulets that carried a faint metallic tang. Not quite beef, not quite pork, but something deeper, earthier, like the scent of rain-soaked soil after a grave has been disturbed. Alex flipped it with tongs, watching the surface crisp to a golden brown, his stomach growling in anticipation. He hadn't eaten since noon, unless you counted the stale granola bar he'd scarfed during his fruitless job interview that afternoon. The realtor's office had been a joke, smiling faces promising opportunities, while his resume gathered dust. By the time he dragged himself home, the crate was waiting on the stoop, unmarked except for the biohazard sticker peeling at the edges. Probably just a shipping error, he figured, scraping the seared exterior onto a plate and drowning it in cheap red wine from a box. The first bite was heaven. Tender, almost melting on his tongue, with a richness that bloomed into subtle notes of iron and salt. He devoured it in minutes, licking the plate clean, the warmth spreading through his chest like a forbidden embrace. Burping softly, he shuffled to the couch, the TV flickering to life with some mindless cop show, and let sleep claim him before the plate even hit the sink. In his dreams, the kitchen reformed around him, but the lights were dimmer, the air thicker, laced with the coppery reek of blood. Alex stood at the counter again, knife in hand, but the meat on the board wasn't a slab. It was a woman's arm, pale and veined, the fingers curled in a silent plea. He hacked at it clumsily, chunks flying, and when he brought a piece to his mouth, it whispered his name. "Alex?" It breathed, soft as silk against his lips. "You've taken me in." He jolted awake, heart pounding, the taste lingering on his palate like regret. The clock glowed 3:17 a.m., and the apartment was silent except for the drip of the faucet in the bathroom. Shaking his head, he chalked it up to indigestion, too much grease on an empty stomach, and stumbled to the fridge for water. That's when he noticed the delivery crate still open on the floor, styrofoam peanuts scattered like maggots. Inside, nestled in the remaining ice packs, was another package, smaller, wrapped in butcher paper stained with what looked like rust. He hadn't ordered extras. Curiosity prickled his skin as he peeled back the paper, revealing a heart, human-sized, raw and glistening, the ventricles pulsing faintly as if it still beat. His breath caught, and he dropped it, the organ thudding wetly to the linoleum, leaving a smear that seeped into the cracks like accusing fingers. By morning, the heart was gone, the floor spotless, as if it had never been. Alex stared at the empty space, rubbing his eyes, convinced he'd hallucinated the whole thing. Stress, he muttered, brewing coffee strong enough to strip paint. But as he sipped, a faint ache bloomed in his chest, right where the meat had settled, a dull throb like something uncoiling inside him. He called the wholesaler, but the line rang endlessly into voicemail, the automated message crackling with static that sounded like muffled sobs. Work was out of the question. He spent the day pacing the apartment, the walls seeming to lean in closer, the shadows in the corners deepening into shapes that flickered when he looked away. By evening, hunger gnawed at him again, sharper this time, a ravenous pull that made his mouth water involuntarily. He ordered pizza. Safe, anonymous, and while waiting, he scoured the internet for stories of bad meat, food poisoning symptoms, anything to explain the feverish heat building under his skin. Nothing matched. The delivery arrived, but as he tore into the box, the cheese stretched like sinew, the pepperoni glistening unnaturally, and he pushed it away, retching into the sink. Night fell like a shroud, the city lights blurring into streaks through the rain-streaked window. Alex lay on the bed, sheets twisted around his legs, sweat soaking through his t-shirt. Sleep came fitfully, fractured by visions. A woman with raven hair and eyes like polished obsidian. Her lips parted in a silent scream as shadows tore at her flesh. She reached for him across a void, her fingers elongating into claws that scraped the air inches from his face. "Mine now," she murmured, her voice echoing in his skull, vibrating through his bones. He woke gasping, the room spinning, and fumbled for the lamp. In the yellow glow, he saw it. A faint outline on the mirror above the dresser, handprints smeared in condensation that hadn't been there before. For slender fingers and a thumb, pressed as if from the inside out. His pulse raced, a staccato drum in his ears, and he backed away, tripping over his sneakers. The ache in his chest intensified, twisting into a vice that squeezed until he doubled over, coughing up flecks of red-tinged phlegm into his palm. Tasted of iron of her. Desperation drove him out into the storm-slicked streets, collar turned up against the downpour, the neon signs of the wholesaler's district flickering like dying fireflies. The building was a squat warehouse on the edge of town, chain-link fence rattling in the wind, no cars in the lot. Alex pounded on the rusted door until his knuckles split, the rain mingling with blood that trickled warm down his wrist. No answer. He circled the perimeter, peering through grimy windows at conveyor belts coated in dust, hooks dangling empty from the rafters like skeletal fingers. A side door hung ajar and he slipped inside, the air thick with the stench of decay and chemicals. Formaldehyde maybe, or something worse. Flashlight from his phone cut through the gloom, illuminating stacks of crates like the one delivered to him. Labels faded but legible. Specimen transport, handle with care. His beam caught on a clipboard hanging from a nail, pages yellowed and curling. Flipping through, his stomach lurched. Entries dated yesterday. Donor E. Harlow, female, 28. Cause, undetermined. A photo clipped to the page showed her, the woman from his dreams, smiling serenely in a hospital gown, for lines snaking from her arm. Below it, in hasty scrawl, partial shipment error, return ASAP. The realization hit him like a gut punch. He'd eaten her, not all of her, but enough, her thigh, maybe, or her flank, carved from the cold table of some back-alley morgue, and Ms. routed to his door. Bile rose in his throat as he staggered back, the clipboard clattering to the concrete floor. Footsteps echoed behind him, soft, deliberate, padding through the puddles forming from his dripping clothes. He spun, flashlight beam jerking wildly, catching only racks of knives glinting malevolently. "Hello!" His voice cracked. The footsteps paused, then resumed, closer now, circling. A whisper slithered from the shadows. "You savored me, Alex." every bite. He bolted for the door, heart slamming against his ribs, but the knob wouldn't turn, jammed or locked from outside. Panic clawed up his spine as he rammed his shoulder into the metal, pain exploding in white-hot bursts. The lights overhead flickered to life on their own, harsh and unforgiving, revealing her. She stood at the far end of the aisle, naked and pale as moonlight, skin unmarked except for the jagged excision scar curving from hip to knee, a gruesome smile where her flesh had been harvested. Harlow. Elena, the name floated unbidden into his mind. Tilted her head, black hair cascading like ink over one shoulder. Her eyes locked on his, pupils dilating into abyssal voids that pulled at him, promising oblivion. "You thought it was just meat," she said, her voice a silken rasp that echoed off the walls. "But I am in you now, flowing through your veins, knitting to your bones." Alex pressed against the door, the cold steel biting into his back. As she took a step forward, her bare feet leaving no prints on the wet floor. The air grew heavy, charged with the ozone crackle of a storm indoors, and he felt it. The throb in his chest sinking with hers, a phantom heartbeat joining his own. She raised a hand, fingers elongating impossibly, nails sharpening to points that gleamed like obsidian shards. "I was discarded," she continued, gliding closer, the scar pulsing faintly with each word. "But you welcomed me home," he screamed, a raw, animal sound that tore from his gut, and lunged for a nearby hook, yanking it free in a shower of rust flakes. Swinging it like a club, he charged, but she was gone, vanishing into the sudden blackout as the lights died again. The warehouse plunged into Stygian dark, his flashlight beam slicing futilely through the void. Breathing ragged, he swept the light in arcs, catching glimpses. A swirl of hair here, a pale curve of shoulder there, always just beyond reach. The whispers multiplied, layering over each other like a chorus of the damned. "Deeper. Taste me deeper. You're mine." Something brushed his ankle, a feather-light touch that sent ice racing up his spine, and he kicked out wildly, connecting with empty air. The ache in his chest blossomed into agony, ribs cracking audibly as if something inside him stretched, reshaped, her essence burrowing into his marrow. He collapsed to his knees, clutching at his shirt, feeling the skin beneath ripple unnaturally, veins bulging black against the white fabric. Crawl. Get to the door. The hook clattered from his numb fingers as he dragged himself forward, nails splintering on the concrete, each inch a battle against the weight pressing down on his lungs. The footsteps resumed, leisurely now, matching his pathetic progress. A shadow loomed in the beam's edge, her shadow, distorted, stretching tall and thin like a specter from hell. "Why run?" she cooed, the words vibrating in his teeth. "We're lovers now, bound by blood and bite." He reached the door, pounding with fists that felt like lead, the metal vibrating under his assault but unyielding. Behind him, the air shifted, carrying her scent, jasmine and rot, intoxicating and vile. He twisted, shining the light full in her face, and she was there, inches away, lips parted in a rictus grin that revealed teeth filed to points. Her hand shot out, faster than thought, fingers wrapping around his throat, nails piercing skin in 4 neat punctures that wept crimson. "Feel me?" she hissed, pulling him close until their noses touched, her breath cold as grave soil against his lips. "I've been remade in you," Alex gurgled, vision tunneling to pinpricks, the world narrowing to the black pools of her eyes. Memories flooded him. Not his, but hers. The sterile bite of surgical lights, the gloved hands carving without consent, the final rattle of breath as life ebbed in a forgotten slab. Rage boiled in her gaze, spilling over into his mind like acid, burning away his fear with borrowed fury. He clawed at her wrist, but his fingers passed through, ghostly insubstantial, while her grip solidified, tightening like a noose of sinew. The scar on her thigh gaped wider, a maw that exhaled mist, and he saw it then. Threads of darkness snaking from the wound, latching onto his chest, burrowing through shirt and flesh to the meat he'd consumed. It unraveled him from within, fibers of muscle and tendon spooling out in wet slaps against the floor, his body hollowing as she reclaimed what was stolen. The door finally gave, kicked open from outside by some night watchman roused by the screams. But it was too late. Alex slumped, his form collapsing inward, bones cracking like dry twigs as her essence flooded back, swelling her silhouette until she stood whole, radiant in the rain's gleam. The watchman froze in the threshold, flashlight beam trembling on the horror. A woman, pristine and vengeful, stepping over the deflated husk that had once been a man, his eyes staring sightless at the ceiling, mouth agape in a final silent bite. She turned to the intruder, lips curving in a smile that promised the same intimate doom, and the warehouse door swung shut behind her, latching with a click that echoed into eternity. But the night wasn't done. Back in the apartment, miles away, the delivery crate sat undisturbed, lid ajar. Inside, amid the melting ice, another package waited, wrapped neatly, labeled for Alex. Seconds.